Good evening. You've been watching live pictures from the House of Commons, where MPs have just wrapped up their marathon debate on whether the government will be compelled to release files relating to the appointment of Lord Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to the United States, an appointment thrust again into the spotlight following the recent revelations about the closeness of his relationship to the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. That's now being investigated by the police. What began as a Tory parliamentary tactic today to embarrass the Prime Minister soon turned into a wider challenge to his authority as senior figures on the Labour backbenches, including the former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, lined up to criticise the lack of scrutiny of exactly what the government would release. Earlier, the Prime Minister had warned that he would not disclose anything that would threaten national security, but following frenetic discussions across the chamber, the government gave in to critics. To add to the confusion, the Metropolitan Police this evening issued a statement that said that they had asked the government not to release any files that would prejudice their investigation. It is a pretty messy picture on a day when the Prime Minister's authority over his party looked a bit ragged. And as you may just have seen, the amendment, or the motion with the amendment, has just been voted through in the Commons. I'm joined here in the studio by our political editor, Beth Rigby. I suppose almost a foregone conclusion, but the debate this afternoon was fascinating and really changed from what we expected it to be when it was first announced.
I mean, it has been quite the day, and I have to say, Matt, I'm reeling a bit right now, and my WhatsApps are full of MPs in absolute fury about what's going on. If we just stand back for a moment, where are we? And we'll get onto the debate in a moment. The release of further details on Mandelson's relationship with Epstein has really blown up a crisis that the Prime Minister hoped he had put to bed last September when he sacked Mandelson as the ambassador to the US after it emerged that he had continued this friendship with Epstein, and it was much closer than perhaps the Prime Minister was told he was led to believe. But the revelations over the weekend that Mandelson also allegedly leaked market-sensitive information back in 2009 under the Gordon Brown administration, that he had taken payments from Epstein amounting to £75,000 when he was a prominent Labour politician in the early noughties, has brought this crisis right to the door of the current Prime Minister. If they had never brought Mandelson back, this would have been a historical scandal that might turn out to be the biggest of this century. And I say that because the Met Police are now investigating Mandelson. If they decide to prosecute him and he has a conviction, he could end up going to prison over this. That is how serious these allegations are. Where does it leave the current Prime Minister? He is in a very, very, very sticky situation tonight, Matt. And the fact that the government have had to today amend their own amendment to allow the release of all these documents and then put the adjudication of what should and shouldn't be put in the public domain, not in the hands of the government, but in the hands of Parliament through the Intelligence and Security Committee. The reason that is happening is because their own MPs do not trust the government. And the person that led that call for scrutiny independent of number 10 was Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister. So the fact that she did that, it was backed up by other senior MPs such as Meg Hillier, tells you very clearly how deeply unhappy about this MPs are. I've got MPs telling me that they're not sure they can stay on in government posts. People might resign. It is a tinderbox, this, that could really ignite. So it's very, very febrile. The other thing that happened this evening, Matt, that has been another blow to the Prime Minister is in Prime Minister's questions, he conceded that the vetting process on which he took the decision to appoint Mandelson as the ambassador back in 2025 made it clear that Mandelson had continued his relationship with Epstein. Now, for many of his MPs, and particularly some of the female MPs, that is unforgivable because that shows a terrible lack of judgment from the Prime Minister in their view. Now, Starmer's defence there at the dispatch box was, I was lied to, I was misled. If I had known then what I have subsequently found out, I would never have appointed him. I regret it deeply. The bind that Number 10 are in this evening is the evidence that they would want to release to prove that point and therefore take some heat out of, as I said, what could be a tinderbox moment. The Met Police have asked the government not to release any documents that prejudice the trial. And Number 10 sources are now saying to me that that means that documentation that would back up Starmer's position, they now cannot release. So he is in a very, very, very fragile position this evening. And the mood, I have to say, in the Parliamentary Party is really, really difficult. And I'm just getting messages through, there's many MPs and a few ministers telling me that they feel compromised by this.
More on that to come, no doubt. Thank you very much indeed, Beth. Beth mentioned the Intelligence and Security Committee. We'll hear from Lord Beamish, who chairs that later this hour. But let's go to the Palace of Westminster now, and John Craig is there. So, John, the vote has gone through. MPs coming out. What are they saying to you?
On the nod, yes. I thought it was interesting. The Speaker didn't leave very long for MPs to shout no, did he? He moved on very quickly in all three times he called it. I'm joined now by Natalie Fleet, the MP for Bolsover, who towards the end of that debate, you may have heard, made a very emotional plea on behalf of the victims. Is that because you felt that perhaps there's too much about the whole process and not enough about the victims? Why did you make that plea?
We have had women here, hundreds of women, that have been trafficked, raped, exploited. And instead we see in this chamber, it's right that politicians are held to account, but we cannot forget the voice of victims in all of this. The only reason any of this happened, the only reason that Jeffrey Epstein was convicted and any of this information was published is that women were brave enough to speak out. Speaking out is difficult. It's something that I use the chamber for, and today I thought about the cost of speaking out, and I reflected upon what happened to Virginia Giuffre. She told her story, and as a result, she felt that she had no choice but to end her life. I used the chamber today to talk about her words. She said, "This isn't just Epstein, it's powerful men, but this is men doing it to women across the world. We have to have a world where women are believed, where shame changes sides, and where men don't hold power over women in the same way." There was cross-party consensus around that in there. I was really proud of the work that we did today. I am proud that everything that Peter Mandelson did, the way that he betrayed women, our party and our parliament, has been called out, that he will be held accountable, and that instead we can now go on to looking at where we can make lives better for victims.
And so are you happy with the outcome that's been reached tonight, which is, of course, that most of this material will be provided, and anything that affects national security or international relations will go to this powerful committee, Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament. Are you happy with that outcome, or would you perhaps have preferred all the material to be released?
I think it's perfect. What it is saying is that the Cabinet Secretary will either release the information or send it to the committee if it needs a decision around it. What there won't be is any cover-up. This is historic victim. This is a long time ago that these women face these heinous crimes. But do you know that just under 200 women will have been raped today? As a government, we've got a duty and a responsibility to make sure that victims get justice, right historic wrongs like we just have, and also make sure that women get a fairer deal now.
What is the mood on the Labour backbenches? Because our political editor, Beth Rigby, has just been describing how many Labour MPs are angry with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister's position is looking far from secure tonight. What's your view, having talked to your colleagues? What's your view and the view of your colleagues?
I wish we weren't here. I am angry. I am really, really angry that we are here. I am angry with Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson. I'm not angry with the Prime Minister that was lied to in the same way that we all were. As soon as he found out what had happened with Mandelson, he sacked him. I am glad that he is no longer a Lord. I am glad that he is no longer a member of the Labour Party. And what I will say, it doesn't matter if you're a Lord or if you're a prince. Men rape women, and if a quarter of women have been raped across the country, then we all know rapists, and it's really important that we call them out. And I am so pleased that the Prime Minister is calling Peter Mandelson out.
But the Prime Minister, he said he regretted appointing Peter Mandelson. He said if he'd known then what he knows now, he wouldn't have done. But the fact is he was warned. I mean, Peter Kyle said on Sky News he was worth the risk. The Prime Minister was warned that it was a risk, and yet he went ahead and appointed him. And surely that shows shows bad judgment by Sir Keir Starmer.
If he had known then what we know now, there's no way that Mandelson would have been anywhere near that job.
But there were warnings, and it was known about he was friends with Epstein.
I don't know the detail of what he did and didn't know. I do know that the Prime Minister is telling us that he didn't know about it then, and what he does know now means that he's out of the party, he's out of the Lords, and he's sacked from that job, thank goodness.
So it sounds as though you have confidence, you have faith in the Prime Minister, unlike some of your Labour colleagues who are pretty angry with the PM and saying he needs to go, and his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, needs to go for pushing this appointment.
From the first day I stepped into this House, I have been here to fight for victims. I've never known a Prime Minister that cares as much about violence against women and girls as Sir Keir Starmer does. I am going to defend him.
Are you concerned about further revelations from either the more Epstein files, all the information that the Commons has now voted to be going to be made public? What are your feelings about what might still come out? Do you think there's worse still to come?
I hate the fact that women's anonymity has been ripped away from them with the release of those files. But I do know that there is so much information in there. There is so much more to come. I just want it all to be in public so that we can see how horrific it was. But this isn't just some powerful men and some women. This is happening across our communities, and the reason we're here today is because those brave women called it out.
But to be fair, to be clear rather, you have confidence in the Prime Minister. You're not going to be putting your name to any motions to say he's got to go or face a challenge. What about McSweeney?
Being in government is really tough. It means it's tougher than I ever thought it would be. And sometimes we see violence against women and girls used for political point scoring. We've seen some of that in the chamber today, but more importantly, we've seen loads of consensus. Whatever happens as a result of the papers that are published will happen. People that should be held accountable will be. I have faith in the Prime Minister.
Natalie Feet, thank you very much indeed. Well, Matt, back to you. One Labour MP has confidence in the PM, and she's pleased with the outcome, but of course, Natalie Fleet is stressing very much that it's the victims we should be thinking about this evening.
Yes, quite, John. Thank you very much indeed. Beth is still here with me in the studio. I'm joined as well by the Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine and former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall. It is good to see you both. And Christine, you were in the Commons for PMQs and a bit later for the debate as well. What do you make of the day?
I haven't seen anything like it, and I hope I don't actually ever see anything like it again. You could almost feel the intake of breath when the Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box and said what he had known before he appointed Peter Mandelson. It was disbelief. I don't know where he goes from here, quite frankly. And I asked him, the question I had was, this has triggered thousands of women across the country today. What are we going to do for them? Are we going to have support lines for them? Because, like Natalie said, we're forgetting in this the women who suffered as a result of what Epstein was doing, but also the women who've been triggered by it. But listening to it today, being part of it, I just don't ever want to be part of anything like that again. Public confidence in politics and politicians is so low at the moment, and this just makes it worse. This just makes people think badly of the system completely. And we now need something drastic to be done to protect the system and to somehow bring us out of this, because it's just, there is nothing good in it at all.
The system, Claire, doesn't often lend itself to cross-party consensus, but that's what Natalie Fleet had to say happened today, and that's what we saw.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the... If you're going to take a positive from it, then make it this, that all members of the House were on the same page, that this was despicable, abhorrent behaviour that cannot be allowed to continue. It cannot be allowed to happen again, and something needs to be done. Now, I think the problem comes in is, what do you mean by something? And I think that everybody will come up with a different idea, but actually... everyone in that House had some really valuable contributions to make today, and even people that I wouldn't necessarily agree with politically. You heard the passion in their voices, as with Natalie Fleet just then, people like John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn, who I'm very far removed from politically, were very, very good at hammering home that this is an absolute disgrace on all our houses.
Yes. People speaking with conscience, I guess, because... often people outside of here think they're speaking to serve their own ends a lot of the time. Is that a point that needs to be made?
Yeah, I think everyone today was speaking with conscience, with anger, and disgust at what we're reading, what we're finding out. Disbelief that it's quite as awful as we're seeing with every release of documents. It has got worse. And I don't think we've heard the end of it yet. And I think that there's going to have to be some sort of reckoning over this, that we learn from it and we move on, because it has been an episode, a shameful episode in British politics.
Yeah.
And you have the two things. You have what was done to those women, the women who were trafficked, the way they were abused. That's appalling. And then it's a shameful episode in British politics as well.
Can I just ask you this sort of a counterpoint to the Prime Minister's position? One of his allies made the point to me today that at the time Mandelson was appointed, he was up for the Chancellorship of Oxford University. Media organisations were trying to get him to come and do podcasting, etc. He went and worked at News UK. And actually, the Prime Minister did not know what we now know because of this release of the tranche of Epstein emails between Mandelson and Epstein. Do you have any sympathy for the Prime Minister at this moment at all?
Not really. I find that very difficult because, although I don't agree politically with Keir Starmer, he's someone I've always had a lot of respect for, and I would go as far as to say I like Keir Starmer, but I can't believe that Peter Mandelson, I didn't think so at the time, and I don't think now he was the right appointment. And I think that questions have been asked about him his entire career. He was sacked twice as a minister, and to put him in that ultra-sensitive position at that time, and look where it's led. Peter Kyle said it was I think it was Peter Kyle said it was a gamble. There was a risk. Well, it hasn't paid off, and it wasn't worth. It wasn't worth this. It wasn't worth this. And the fact that what I am still waiting for is something. In all the statements I've seen from Peter Mandelson, I understand now he won't be able to make any statements. But all the statements that he said, I just found there was no regret really in it, and it was distasteful. But I understand now he won't be able to say any more.
You know, Beth, Christine said there should be a reckoning. I don't know if you meant for the government or not. Clearly, the Liberal Democrats can't force that, but Labour Party members can. And a lot of them got up to speak today and showed that they really weren't satisfied with the way the government was going about this. Is this going to precipitate more from them?
Look, when Peter Mandelson was sacked last September because of those emails released that showed that the friendship between he and Jeffrey Epstein went on long after Epstein was convicted of sexual offences. This caused a lot of unhappiness on the benches, particularly from female MPs. They were furious with Keir Starmer. He sacked him. He did an interview trying to explain the mistakes he'd made. And then really the world moved on. What's happened over the weekend is these further revelations has blown this all up again. And it's not just about Starmer now. It's actually, as I said, about what happened in the Brown administration. And actually, that there's two things going on there. There's kind of the way that Mandelson spoke of the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He, releasing and sending Epstein an email saying he's finally gone.
Yes.
Which must be very personally upsetting to Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown then raised concerns with the government last September saying, can you just check what he was doing in government at that time? And they said they could find no paper trails of any information being shared. And then we find in these the leaks. So there's a whole really serious issue about a criminal investigation here. But the problem for Keir Starmer is now this admission that we're now learning more and more about the closeness of the relationship between Epstein and Manson. And some of the emails are just actually very disgusting, and I'm not even going to repeat them, but they've made me feel physically sick. It's awful, right? And then you've got all these MPs going, but Keir Starmer, you put him into the ambassador role. Yes, you didn't know about this information, but you have admitted in the Commons today that the vetting process said that Peter Mandelson had a continued friendship with Epstein, and that was what the vetting process has discovered. And I think for a lot of the MPs, and as I said, particularly the female MPs, they're like, for them, it's an open shut case. He should not have been put back into post. And that's why Kemi Badenoch went on that today, because regardless of what happened in the Gordon Brown era, the fact that Starmer took that decision to put him back in, lots of his MPs found it really difficult at the time. And now they're finding it absolutely unbearable. And then the question is, and this is the big if, and I don't know the answer to this, whether or not, as I said, this tinderbox lights. So whether or not does someone resign? If that happens, then things could move very quickly. Well, I'm not getting a sense of that right now, but what I am getting a sense of, as I said, is people are saying to me there's a lot of MPs that feel very compromised. And I think the fact that the MPs today forced the government into amending its amendment to make sure that Parliament had oversight of what was released, not Number 10, gives you a sense of the absolute breakdown of trust and respect and regard between the benches to the government tonight.
A good time to put that to a Labour MP. Let's go to Central Lobby and speak to Deputy Chair of the Standards and Privileges Committee, Paula Barker, who earlier said the original government amendment was unacceptable. Do you think what got voted through was acceptable, Paula?
I'm content with the amendment that has been voted through, and I'm really, really grateful to my colleagues on the Intelligence and Security Committee for being so robust in their pushback, and also for assisting with the wording of the amendment, as I understand.
Do you trust the government now?
I mean, of course I trust the government, and I think it's very, very sad that we've reached this point. We shouldn't have had to. As I said in the chamber, I was ashamed of the original amendment, and it's with deep regret that we have ended up where we are. But I'm glad that the whole House has come together this evening, and we have found a suitable amendment to everyone concerned.
But really, hearing the language you're using of regret, and we shouldn't have got to this point, how can you still trust the government if they've been forced into this amendment and forced into sharing the information that will then go through the ISC committee? How can you maintain trust?
Because I think public trust and confidence in politics and politicians as a whole has been eroded, and we have to ensure that we rebuild that trust and confidence. It's not going to be easy, and it shouldn't be easy either. But we have to do everything within our power to get back to that. There was a number of colleagues from all sides of the House who stood up today, but particularly those on my own benches who stood up, were counted and pushed back and said it is not acceptable. And I hope that this is a reset now. I hope that backbenchers will be listened to in a more constructive manner going forward, and hopefully that will assist in rebuilding trust and confidence with the general public.
And trust in the Labour Party, because things certainly seem fairly divided between you on the backbenches and the people running the show?
Look, I think, a lot of people talk about loyalty to the party, and I don't know any Labour MP who is not loyal to the Labour Party and who, is absolutely committed to the Labour Party. There's a difference between loyalty and obedience and standing up for what is morally right. And I think people, colleagues, including myself, has stood up for what is morally right today. And I hope this sends a very clear message that, quite frankly, we have to do better.
Just final question for you. What are your thoughts on the Prime Minister's judgment? And we heard the atmosphere today was, well, like Christine said, like nothing else she's experienced, especially when he was at the dispatch box during Prime Minister's questions, saying he was aware of that ongoing relationship at the time between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson. What are your thoughts on his judgment in putting him in post in the first place?
I mean, I think, colleagues are despondent. I think colleagues feel extremely let down. But I do also think that there are questions to be asked by the Prime Minister of his advisers about information and advice he was given, information and advice that was withheld. Whom gave that advice and information? And I think that the Prime Minister must launch an investigation tonight and dig deep into that, because people must be held accountable. We are hearing that, the Prime Minister was advised to keep Mandelson on despite all this information. That does a huge disservice to our Prime Minister, it does a huge disservice to our party, and it does a huge disservice to our country, and that has to stop.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's get more on the questions surrounding security now. Joining us is the former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, who was also Foreign Secretary in John Major's government, wearing multiple hats. So let's work through them one by one. As a former Foreign Secretary, had you been involved in appointing ambassadors? What was the process like? Where did you take advice from? And what do you make, if I can ask another question in a row, what do you make of the way they went through this process this time?
Well, it very much depends the kind of person you're thinking of proposing as an ambassador. If he comes from a diplomatic background in the Foreign Office, then you already have most of the knowledge you need as to his or her reliability, integrity, and other matters of that kind. If, on the other hand, as does occasionally occur, there are good reasons to contemplate a candidate who is not already a diplomat, perhaps a former minister, perhaps someone from a different background altogether, then you have to be that much more careful, because they will have a history, a separate career, and there may be parts of that separate life, a previous life, that may be inconsistent with the job you're contemplating them for.
Yeah, a political appointment, effectively. It was Karen Pierce in post before, who was and remains a career diplomat, but replaced by Peter Mandelson. Is it therefore unwise to make those political appointments to those kind of jobs?
Not necessarily. There can be occasions when it is absolutely correct to choose someone, perhaps a previous senior minister, who already knows the president or the prime minister of the country to whom they're going to be accredited. I could give you half a dozen examples where it's turned out to be a very successful thing to do. But for the most part, our ambassadorial appointments are from people who have a diplomatic experience. The one exception to that actually is Washington, where there have been previous examples when perfectly good ambassadors have been appointed. The problem with Mandelson was not that he hadn't been a diplomat. It is that he'd already been sacked 3 times, or had to resign 3 times from roles in the previous government, and was known to be someone who was intellectually brilliant, but at the same time had rotten judgment, and put himself in positions that caused embarrassment not only to him, but to his colleagues and to the country.
When it comes to the judgment of putting him in the post in the first place, who's ultimately responsible for that? The Prime Minister?
Yes, absolutely so. It depends how senior the appointment is. If it's an ambassador to a relatively small country with whom we don't have any particular problems, then number 10 Downing Street would hardly be likely to get involved. The Foreign Office can handle that by itself. But when you're considering someone as senior, the most senior appointment of any ambassador around the country is the British ambassador to the United States. And when the person you are considering has already been forced to resign from 3 ministerial posts in previous governments, then you have to be exceptionally careful that you're not going to give that person an opportunity to go through the same mess again, which is exactly what's happened.
Well, we'll find out in due course how careful they were or not, as the case may be, once the files have gone through the Intelligence and Security Committee, which you used to chair. We're going to hear from Lord Beamish, who's the current chair of that now. But bearing in mind you used to run that committee, what's the process for them? What will they be looking for? What can they do?
Well, I think we've got to get this in the right order. Normally, it wouldn't be necessary to involve the Intelligence and Security Committee. The Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister's Office, the intelligence agencies, MI6, MI5, would probably be giving advice, and that would be sufficient. The problem that has occurred on this occasion is that the government's initial announcement was they were going to release all the information except those where they believed for either national security reasons or relations with foreign governments, it would be inappropriate to release them, and therefore they simply would not be seen by the outside world. Now, that was a very, very foolish preliminary statement that the Prime Minister made, because he either knew or damn well ought to have known that one of the purposes of the Intelligence and Security Committee is they already have access to classified information. The whole purpose of the committee, of very senior parliamentarians, is to be able to have independent examination so the public can be satisfied the government isn't of the day, whichever government it is not just covering itself, but it is acting legitimately when there are real reasons of national security. In these circumstances, Keir Starmer ought to have known already, and if he didn't know, he should have been immediately informed that one way through this particular difficulty would be for those most sensitive documents, which were classified documents, where national security might be involved, he could announce right away that part of the documentation would be shown to the Intelligence and Security Committee, and they could discuss with the government either whether these documents ought to be published or perhaps published in a redacted form. But if so, what you try to do is you publish as much of the document as it's reasonable to do. Now, on this occasion, Keir Starmer made an initial announcement saying we were simply going to withhold these documents. And it was only as a result of political pressure, both from his own MPs, but also from the Conservative opposition, that actually forced him to change his mind. So yet again, we have a Prime Minister who, unfortunately, from a national interest point of view, has this incredible reputation of not being able to make up his mind and changing his mind constantly on very important matters. Somebody once used the phrase, as one door closes, another slams in your face. Well, that's been the history of the last few months.
Sir Malcolm Rifkin, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. Let's go back to Central Lobby and our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who I think has been joined by another MP, John.
Two MPs, actually, two for the price of one, you might say. I'm joined by two of the key players from the drama that's unfolded here in Parliament today. Alex Burghardt, the Conservative Shadow Minister who opened the debate, and Sir Julian Lewis, who a former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, who had a crucial intervention towards the end about what Sir Keir Starmer said at Prime Minister's questions. First of all, Alex Burghardt, are you happy with the outcome? Do you feel you've had to make a concession to the government? What's your view of the outcome, the late amendment that was put down by the government?
No, look, we're very pleased. The government was very keen not to release any information about Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to Washington. And today they folded. They didn't have the support on their own benches, and they've had to support our motion to hand it all over. And now some of that information will go to the Intelligence and Security Committee, information that is, has national security implications. But the important thing is it's coming to members of the House of Commons. It's not being held up in Downing Street. So look, big defeat for the government today, massive undermining of the Prime Minister's authority. It was a huge coup in Prime Minister's questions when you heard Kemi Badenoch say, did you know that Peter Mandelson had maintained his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein even after Jeffrey Epstein had been convicted for paedophilia? And the Prime Minister said yes. And I think from that moment on, everyone in the House has been questioning the Prime Minister's judgment.
And Sir Julian, that was what you raised in your intervention with the junior minister towards the end, wasn't it? But you have concerns about what the Prime Minister said. What were they?
Well, the key question was asked by Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's questions, and I'll actually read it out. She said, can the Minister tell us did the official security vetting that he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein? And he said, yes, it did. He went on to try and say that that led him to ask various questions and he was lied to, and it was only when the latest stuff came out that he sacked him straight away. But the point is, what more do you need to know that someone who has served a prison sentence for prostitution and paedophilia-related offences was having a continuing relationship with the man that you were proposing to appoint ambassador to Washington, D.C. in order not to appoint him?
Now, can I ask you both, do you believe what the Prime Minister said at PMQs?
Well, I believe he knew that he had an ongoing relationship. What I don't believe is that he had any excuse after that admission for having appointed him as the ambassador to the United States.
And what we learned today was that the Cabinet Office told the Prime Minister that there were three major concerns. The first was that Peter Mandelson had been fired twice before, that he might not be a very reliable person. The second was that Peter Mandelson had very complex business affairs. He had a 21% shareholding in a company called Global Counsel that he'd set up that did a lot of business in China and Russia, and they were very concerned about that. But third, they explicitly told him that Peter Mandelson had maintained this friendship with Epstein and had taken his hospitality in New York and in Paris after the conviction. That alone should have been enough.
That's a killer.
And how on earth anyone could decide to appoint someone after that to the most senior diplomatic role Britain has to offer? Beggars belief.
A killer, you said.
It is a killer.
So when you say it's a killer, do you think the Prime Minister's so badly damaged that his position is now perilous?
He's dead in the water, he's holed below the waterline, and if only the Labour Party had an efficient way of removing their leaders, he'd be gone before the end of the month.
It must be said that I was in for almost all of the debate, and I didn't hear a single member of the Labour Party stand up to defend the Prime Minister, which is unheard of in these circumstances.
OK, gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. So that's Sir Julian Lewis and Alex Burkhardt, obviously, the Tory points of view. But as you have just heard, they don't think the Prime Minister is going to last much longer.
Yeah, they're not the only ones, John, judging by what's being said here in the studio too. We'll get onto that in a bit. But as we've been discussing, the government altered its amendment to say that any papers which are prejudicial to national security or international relations will be referred to Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee. Earlier, I spoke to its current chair, Lord Beamish. Tell us what your role entails on the Intelligence and Security Committee and how it goes about its business.
Well, we are a statutory committee of Parliament. We're not a select committee. We have legal powers to demand intelligence information. We also deal with highly classified information which can't be put in the public domain. That's why we were set up by Parliament as a mechanism to deal with it. There are 9 members from both houses and across party.
It looks like you're going to get a load of files then on the appointment of Peter Mandelson as the UK ambassador to the US. But you could have demanded those anyway. That's within your powers. What I'm saying is today's debate and rigmarole and votes and everything else didn't necessarily need to happen, did it?
Well, we could have asked for it you know, we have legal powers to enforce governments to release them. But I understand Parliament's make a decision today to give that information to us. We will look at it. We will decide what we're going to do with it. We don't ever set terms of references for our inquiries. We follow the evidence and see what happens.
Yeah. When you woke up this morning, did you have an inkling you'd be involved anyway?
Well, I think as soon as you get a situation where, quite rightly, there's, you know, and I understand why people get suspicious, why things can't be put in the domain for national security reasons, but there are good reasons why that. We always aim with our reports to try and put as much as possible in the public domain, but we also don't need to get a situation where we put things in which will damage national security.
The big coincidence here is this has all come about because of millions of documents being put in the public domain, a lot of that redacted, a lot of criticism of the redaction and how it's been done and perhaps done in the wrong place. Can you redact some of the stuff you get if it's then put in the public domain? And what considerations do you then have when you're doing that?
Well, we have a well-tried, tested report for our reports, a redaction process, which is not about things that are embarrassing. It's about things that we deem, after consultation with the security services, we think, you know, would prejudice national security. Embarrassment isn't one of them. It's got to be able to meet that test of damaging national security. But if you read many of our public reports, we have redactions in it for obvious reasons.
Is there going to be another consideration for you now as well? Because the Metropolitan Police don't want their criminal investigation to be prejudiced by any material being put in the public domain. Are you going to have to think about that too?
Well, yes. I mean, whatever they decide, we wouldn't do anything which would... We have our own legal advisor anyway. We would do nothing which would undermine their process either.
Mm. You yourself are a Labour peer. You were a Labour MP for a long time. When it comes to the makeup of the committee and I guess being as objective and impartial as possible, how does that work?
Well, I have Jeremy Wright's. Jeremy Wright's my deputy chair. The committee is consensual. It's cross-party. Mm. I think it'd be very difficult if you've ever attended one of our meetings to decide who was which party. But what we are determined to do is ensure that we uphold our role that's set out in statute, but also ensure... and the key thing is try and get as much in the public domain as possible, balance it against that issue around protecting national security.
I know you don't you've said already, you don't set frames of reference until you know what's in front of you. But is there any sense of the timeline of this, when you might get material, when you'll sit next, when you'll discuss it, what realistic timescale there'll be for putting stuff out for people to look at?
Well, not really, because we don't actually know how much we're going to get, first of all.
Yeah.
And it, I think, would be wrong to actually set timelines. I've been on the committee nearly 10 years now, and the problem is with the information we get sometimes, we ask for a piece of information, it then leads to more information being asked, so things can take a while. But, you know, I can assure the public that we are thorough in terms of the process which we use.
Yeah, the committee for a while, but parliamentarian for a long time. You ever known anything like this?
No. I mean, this is unprecedented, the idea that you had a serving cabinet minister who was leaking you know, market-sensitive information to an individual who could benefit from this. No, I think it's just unprecedented.
There you go, Lord Beamish speaking to me earlier on, giving you a bit of a primer on the workings of the Intelligence and Security Committee. If you hadn't heard of it before, I'm thinking you're going to hear a lot more about it from now on, the ISC. RGO, Christine and Claire are still here now. Let's go back to what we were hearing John discuss in the lobby, Christine, about... Well, of course, Conservatives are going to say they don't think the Prime Minister's got long left, but you feel the same way, and trying to be as, well, non-partisan as possible. Why?
I just think it's very difficult when he today appeared in the House to lack any authority at all, even with his own MPs. He's been forced to change what he wanted. He's been forced to give the files to the Intelligence and Security Committee. Over the weekend, we're going to get headline after headline after headline about how much did he know, when did he know it, Mandelson's relationship, why was he ambassador. This story is not over because Parliament has made a decision, and Parliament is going to want to know what went on. He's going to be under constant pressure, and his authority and credibility has been, I think, potentially fatally damaged by this tonight. And also, from the government's point of view, they have to think about their, for want of a better word, brand. How does the Labour Party look if it, you know, if it doesn't get itself out from under this scandal, which it is? They have to do that. And there are parliamentary elections in Scotland and Wales and local elections in England. I would not want to be a Labour candidate going to a door in Scotland over the next 4 months because people are angry. And rightly so, at what Epstein appears to have got away with. And now they discover what Mandelson's allegedly been doing. And I represent Edinburgh West. The Royal Bank of Scotland World Headquarters was in Edinburgh West. There are a lot of people worked there and who will want to know exactly what went on. Alistair Darling is very popular because of everything he did at the time. Yeah. But Mandelson's role in it now is going to... People are angry about that. They're angry on behalf of the women. This is a mess that the Labour Party needs to get itself out from under. Yeah, we've got those elections in 4 months and a by-election in 4 weeks as well as it happens. Claire, we won't discuss that in detail, of course. But it does beg the question. It makes life more difficult for everybody associated with the Labour movement. Activists on the street knocking on doors,
they're going to hear about this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was a local council candidate back when Boris Johnson was going through Partygate. So you can imagine how unpleasant that was, because everybody tars you with the same brush. They say, you're a Conservative, therefore this is your fault. And it's like, well, I'm here to talk about bins and parking and planning. I have nothing to do with parties. But that was it. They weren't having any of it. And I think that those candidates are going to be in for a very rough ride. So I hope the Labour Party has something in place to look after those candidates, because I think actually they do have a duty to do so. You get an awful lot of young people standing for council seats. This may be the first time they've ever done it. And this is their introduction to politics. I really feel sorry for them.
It's a difficult business, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed for the time being. Tonight's vote is sure to feature heavily on our new late-night programme this evening, The Wrap. It's on at 10 o'clock, here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers. Could be one and the same, those things. Will be the political commentator Adam Bolton, formerly of this parish, and Politics Joe's political editor Ava Santina Evans. Earlier, I spoke to author of Keir Starmer, the biography, and the former Labour Party senior advisor, Tom Baldwin, about what he made of the pressure on the PM. You know the Prime Minister better than most. What will he be feeling now, especially after the day or the few days he's had?
I think he made it pretty clear in the House of Commons that he's extremely angry. I think he's also deeply, deeply frustrated. And this is a dangerous time for the country, dangerous time for the world. And he's constantly being dragged back into issues of what happened in Westminster, who's up, who's down, or, in this case, a scandal about something that happened back in 2009, 2010, 5 years before he was even an MP under the previous Labour government.
But is he being dragged back into it because of his judgment or lack of?
Look, I think there is a genuine question for Keir Starmer about the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to Washington. Now, I think the question revolves around what he knew when he appointed him. There was a lot of stuff in the public domain. The Financial Times had reported very honourably that Peter Mandelson had continued to have links with Epstein after his conviction. That was in the public domain. Now, it didn't stop the BBC putting Mandelson up as the eminence grise for its general election coverage. It didn't stop a lot of commentators, indeed politicians, saying the appointment of Peter Mandelson was a masterstroke. Now, so I think for people to say this was a scandalous misjudgment, they have to show that Keir Starmer knew more than was already in the public domain at the time of the appointment. And presumably, that's what the inquiry will find out.
They're not the ones running the country, though, of course, are they? The Prime Minister is. He was at the dispatch box today.
I think a lot of commentators think they're running the country.
He was at the dispatch box today during Prime Minister's questions, saying he was aware of that ongoing relationship.
But you can read the Financial Times.
Well, maybe he should have read it and made a different decision.
And I think, stand back from this. Does anybody seriously think that, knowing what we know now, Keir Starmer would have appointed Peter Mandelson to be ambassador to Washington? No. So clearly there is evidence that's emerged since in private correspondence between Mandelson and Epstein, which the Department of Justice in America has unearthed, which changes your perspective. But I do think it's difficult to question someone's judgment unless you know what facts they had at disposal beforehand.
There's a lot of baggage there already, though, wasn't there? I mean, do you think he was right to appoint him at the time, or do you think that was a mistake then?
I think there were good reasons to believe that his ambassadorship would blow up. Every job he's ever done has blown up in one way or the other. He's had to resign twice from that previous Labour government before he was reappointed, and then did the scandalous stuff. So I also think, there's a question about how wise it was to insert someone who's pretty narcissistic, who's been obsessed with wealth and power all his life, into the current Washington, D.C., where Trump has made it the sort of playpen for narcissism and wealth and power.
Yeah.
That's like putting a kid in a sweet shop.
To get into the position to be leader of the Labour Party and now the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer himself had to manoeuvre and bite his tongue and sometimes say things that perhaps he didn't feel when he was in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. That's just part and parcel of politics, isn't it? Can you understand why people are calling his judgment into question now? And do you think they might have a point? You know him very well. Has he got sound judgment?
I think he has good judgment. I think I can say with a degree of certainty that he actually had a lot of misgivings about whether to appoint Peter Mandelson in the first place.
So why was he persuaded otherwise?
Well, he's given a short list of names which included George Osborne and another name which I'm told was even more ridiculous. and he plumped for what he thought was probably the best option at the time. Now,
a lot of people think the best option was sticking with the woman who was already US ambassador.
I think with hindsight, we can all say that. All I would say is that there are a lot of people displaying a lot of hindsightery now who didn't say that at the time.
Do you think Keir Starmer and his government will survive this?
I think one of the problems of politics at the moment, one of the reasons why, we seem to be in a cycle where media think prime ministers change every 1 or 2 years, is because we don't talk about what happens on the ground with the outcome. When was the last time a minister or prime minister resigned over what's happening in our schools or our health service or our economy or the world? It's always about Westminster politics. And one of the reasons why people feel so disassociated from politics is because it's just about politicians, who's up, who's down, what they talk about at Westminster, rather than what's actually happening in real lives out there. So I think the frustration Keir Starmer's got, I think, is, his distaste for politics is well known, and he's becoming defined by it. That's the paradox of it. And he, I think, is desperate to get back to trying to deliver, being judged on that delivery in public services, on our economy, on the world stage in this really fragile moment for the world, rather than this endless, inward-looking stuff about what he knew about something that happened 5 years before he was an MP.
It's one thing, Tom, pointing the finger at the media, but what about the Parliamentary Labour Party? A lot of his backbenchers, the ones who form his majority, they're the ones asking those questions as well. They're the ones standing up in the debate today saying they don't trust the government to do the right thing by these files. Yeah, and I think some of the handling of the PLP hasn't always been great. I think some of the PLP itself has been a little bit sort of trigger-happy and febrile. I think we're in a weird place in politics. I mean, there's something curious. I mean, the 5 most unpopular prime ministers in polling history are, in ascending order, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Now, maybe that you didn't like any of them, but I think that fact about each of them breaking the previous one's record for unpopularity suggests there's something going on there beyond the capability or ethics of each individual prime minister. Let's have some final thoughts from our duo, Christine and Claire. Look, I know neither of you are going to agree with an awful lot of what Tom Baldwin says, but he raises a couple of interesting points. The first one, Claire, being, while all this is going on, the bandwidth is taken up by it, and the running of the country and the getting on with the rest of the world is going to get parked, and that is a problem.
It is a problem, but this is why, as a Prime Minister, you have to be able to almost put it to one side. You have to be able to deal with this and give it the respect it deserves. But also you have a duty to bring about business that is going to affect the country, because that is what you are employed to do. Unfortunately, the Labour Party and the Labour government don't seem to have a policy agenda which makes sense. Any policies that they come up with, as soon as somebody says, I don't like it, I feel this isn't the right thing, you find there are U-turns, the communications go downhill, and we get absolutely nowhere. And I think that we are sleepwalking into a parliament that is not going to get anything meaningful done. Now, from a political point of view, I can sit there from a Conservative side and point the finger. But actually, more importantly, the country deserves to have people making laws and making their lives better. And if they're not seeing that, you can understand why the anger towards politicians comes in.
Yeah. The other point is how governing parties tend to look back at previous success for a few answers. Inevitably, they're looking back to the new Labour era and people like Peter Mandelson. You've seen that with the Conservatives as well, right? So is there inevitability to that? It worked last time, it might work again this time.
I don't think anybody could look back at Peter Mandelson and say it worked last time, because it's never worked. So I think that if that's what the Labour government are doing, that's a big mistake. But I think the point is, yes, it's taking up the bandwidth, and that's bad for all of us. And I don't mean politicians, I mean the country. What we all want, even though we might disagree on policy, what we all want is a government that gets the economy moving, that gets us back to a position where people are not worried about their energy bills, about their children's education, about whether or not if they have a heart attack or a stroke, there'll be an ambulance gets to them in time. That's what people want. And the problem that Keir Starmer now has is that everything he says is cloaked in this scandal, and he's going to be pulled back to it time and time again. The government can't afford for that to happen. The government needs attention on what it's doing It needs to focus its attention on that and not be worrying about a massive mistake in appointing Peter Mandelson to that position. And they need to get away from that. They need to get out from under that, and they need to move on to fresh ground and be able to do that. And the question they will all have to ask themselves tonight and over the next few days is how they're going to do that.
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, they would argue if they were here that they are getting on with the business and cancer strategy's been published and all that kind of thing.
Nobody's seeing it because this scandal of massive proportions is what we're all talking about and we're all worried about and we're all thinking, where is this going to go? And I think they're going to have to do something to move on from that.
On that, just to last sort of 30 seconds or so, is everyone talking about this? Or are people still thinking, hang on, it's just Westminster politics, it's terrible, and they're turning off and turning away?
We are talking about it.
I was going to say, I thought that, and I thought, is this just a Westminster issue? And then I've had messages from people who are not political at all saying, what on earth is going on? Can you just explain in idiot's terms what this means? And even my son, who was 17, has been flicking through going, do you know this Peter Mandelson chap? What's going on here? It is having what they call cut-through, and I think people are discussing it.
And I asked genuinely in the comments today, what are we going to do about all the women, the children who've been abused? This is triggering for them. They'll be talking about it. They'll be thinking about it. We need to do something to make sure that they have the support, helplines, etc., that they need. This is a massive scandal, and the Labour Party is going to have to do something to draw a line and move away from this situation.
I did like it when you said we're talking about it. I'd love to think the whole country is watching us right now.
A large proportion of it will be.
A large proportion will be, and more people will be talking about it. I think you hit the nail on the head previously, Christine. This is going to rumble into the weekend, and look, who knows? Potentially more revelations. But we've been talking about it for a few days now, and every day seems to throw up something new. Do you think it's going to happen again tomorrow as well?
Oh yeah. When I got up this morning to come in for PMQs, I had absolutely no idea that it was going to be
like it was.
And I've been an MP now for 8 years.
Okay.
And we've gone from crisis to crisis to crisis
to
crisis.
We'll hit another crisis if I don't say thank you very much to you both for joining me this evening, and goodbye to you. Back tomorrow at 7. Bye for now.